Well, hello, one and all, and welcome to What the Trans?
What the Trans?
Yes, What the Trans, which is this podcast that we are doing now, and as you might be able to deduce from our images and the fact that we're called What the Trans, we're going to focus heavily on trans issues in the news. How the devil have you been, Michelle?
I'm alright, I'm good. I spent the last 10 days at the BFI Flair LGBT Film Festival, which was awesome. It was all on the South Bank. Lots of movies, lots of chats. We're going to get right into that for the main thing. But how are you doing?
I'm good, yeah. I had a positive experience selling something to somebody online. It was very strange, because normally that's the sort of thing that just invites trouble.
I'm very glad you were not murdered. That's good.
I too am very glad I was not murdered by someone who came to buy an item of furniture, so that was lovely. There was a really interesting thing I was going to mention about something that happened earlier this week, and I can't remember what it is, so I don't think it was that interesting, to be honest.
Oh, Manchester Pride. The community meeting.
Yes, that's right. Well, it was so last week was the first Manchester Pride inaugural conference, and so I was there, listening to what was going on. There were workshops and talks and things. It was very interesting. Obviously, there was networking, as there so often is, but I was there, in a professional capacity. I was there wearing my work hat. So it was like I'd just taken the two large sectors of my life, which is my job and my LGBT, and specifically trans-flavoured activism, podcasting, not shutting up about it sort of stuff, and smashing them together. So that's always fun. But yes, that was a very interesting day. It remains to be seen what, if anything, Pride will do with the information and the things that were talked about. So yes, I'm interested to see what comes next.
This is all about they got Ariana Grande headlining. They've doubled the price of some of the tickets.
Yes,
I'm guessing that came up.
It did, perhaps not to the extent that some of us in the audience might have wanted. But it was made very, very clear in the sort of opening preamble that particular subject, in terms of ticket pricing and so on, was not something that they would favour discussion on, essentially. It was kind of addressed in the opening thing, and so in the sessions that I attended, it didn't come up again. I think better, more eloquent people than me kind of need to be having that conversation. Because I haven't engaged with the musical programme of Manchester Pride for quite a while, because that in itself I don't feel is something that has been being done as well as it could have been in terms of showcasing LGBT talent or whatever. So I could talk about the whole thing for an entire episode, but that is not what we're here to do. So
fair enough.
It was interesting. We'll see what happens next. More news as we get it, of course.
Yeah, I'm interested in hearing more. So, keep me in the loop.
I will, yes. But in the meantime, let's keep everybody else in the loop about all of the other stuff that we've been reading about this week. So we've got a slightly truncated news section for you this time, simply because the majority of the show is going to be taken up by Michelle's thrilling tales of the BFI Flair Festival. Which I'm looking forward to getting into. But first we are going to do a bit of news, and
I just did finger guns to nobody but myself.
Excellent.
That's a weird thing to do, but I think that means I'm ready. Hit me with some terrible news.
I will hit you with some terrible news. Well, so it's probably worth pointing out when we're recording this. It is currently the evening of the 2nd of April 2019, and there was something that was supposed to happen on the 29th of March. To Britain itself. That was supposed to be the date of exiting from the European Union. That has yet to occur, essentially it's that time, unfortunately. It is finally that time. We've been avoiding this particular subject like it's an electric fence, in part because we ourselves are so sick of hearing about it, and we're pretty sure you guys are as well. So yes, it's Brexit. And in all the rhetoric surrounding the ongoing clusterfuck that is the UK's exit from the EU, which was and remains a fucking stupid idea, it's very, very difficult to make any sense of it whatsoever. However, one of the prime concerns for a lot of LGBTQ people who, as a demographic, overwhelmingly voted to remain in the EU, is the potential loss of the European Charter of Fundamental Rights. Now, this is the only legally binding international human rights document that specifically protects LGBTQ people. at the beginning of March 2019, the LGBT plus Brexit Impact Assessment was launched by Gaystar News and LGBT plus For a People's Vote, and the idea was to explore how Brexit might have a specific impact on the community in the UK. So this report that's been produced and was launched in early March does make for some quite interesting, if slightly terrifying reading. You can find it just by Googling LGBT Brexit Impact Assessment, but of course we will put the link to the PDF of that report in the description of the episode. But it highlights, among other things, about how British LGBT rights overall have been positively affected by membership of the European Union. Specifically, the Red Letter Day that a lot of people will sort of point to as the beginning of it all, the underpinning of everything, was on May the 1st, 1999, when Article 13 came into force. And Article 13 states that member states could take appropriate action to tackle discrimination on the basis of sex, racial or ethnic origin, religion or belief, disability, age or sexual orientation. So that's where that's the moment from which it was enshrined in EU law, the 1st of May. So that's a fun little thing to add to your May Day celebrations, if that's something you do. But a lot of concern about the current mess is centered around the potential for the LGBT rights stuff to be entirely sidelined or even rolled back with the jettisoning of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. There is a historical precedent for this in the British Parliament, and given the number of now senior Tory politicians who voted in favour of Section 28 when that was in force, and who have subsequently expressed homophobic and transphobic views, such as Chris Grayling, Ian Duncan Smith, and that awful Davis fellow, who was only too happy to follow an agenda set by Nazi-adjacent nightmare people who claim to be feminists, I think a level of concern about this is a bit justified. So, the Impact Assessment Report states in a nutshell, fucked if we know, but the potential for harm is strong. So, among other things, the uncertainty over all of this is killing us, like collectively, I think, as a nation, but you and I specifically talked about this, Michelle, because this is such an absolute mess. And we don't know what's going to happen, and what's then going to happen in the wake of the things that are going to happen that we don't know about, and it's just... the future is this yawning void, and I think the outcome that you and I might hope for, and everybody else who voted Remain, it may well not happen. We may have to fight the same battles again, in terms of LGBT equality, just to hold on to it in the face of a rising tide of populism and kind of nationalism, in a sense, which the Tory party have definitely taken a great deal of impact and influence from, because this was, it's such a fucking mess. I hate it. I just want it to stop.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
That's my political assessment. Ashley Talbot, political editor of What the Trans says, it's all fucked.
When it comes to, I think when it comes to our line on, sort of editorial content and news, fact-based content, this was a real conflict for me on how to cover this, because we probably almost definitely have people who vote for Brexit as listeners of the show, so I don't want to put them off. But then...
I do.
But then, it's like you said, so much of the rights we have that have been enshrined in law have started at the EU. So it's that odd thing where we have to take a stand, because, the first remit of the show is... pro-trans rights, full stop. So, on that position, I think it's fair to say that what the trans stance across the board is, we want to remain in the EU, we want to revoke Article 50, because there's a lot of uncertainty about whether our rights will continue to be enshrined in law afterwards. Mm-hmm. And I think that trumps any consideration to trying to also appeal to people who want to leave, because I equate the two with a direct attack on our rights. Does that make any sense? Do you agree with that?
Basically, editorially, yes. But
I'm sorry, this is a conversation we should have had before recording, but I have been so snowed under with this festival and stuff.
But you are right by pointing out that so much of UK legislation is underpinned by that EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. So there have actually been court cases here in the UK where the government has been forced to follow a court ruling based on EU law, and that's then set a precedent for LGBT rights, which includes the Gender Recognition Act from 2004. There was a court case, I want to say in 2002, whereby the UK government at the time tried to make the argument, no, we don't need to do that. And the EU said, well, no, actually, guys, we very much think that you do. And so they were then forced to, in some way, recognize trans people in law, which is something that a lot of the debate around the Gender Recognition Act consultation that kind of forgot that rather fundamental little fact, but whatever. So much of this stuff, it's affected foster care, the pension ages, and all sorts of other LGBT rights, not just trans rights specifically, are underpinned by membership of the EU. And so when cabinet ministers are gleefully saying, oh, we're going to scrap the Human Rights Act, we're going to get rid of the Charter of Fundamental Rights, all of that underpinning, everything that then holds up, once that foundation is taken away, where does that leave us?
Yeah, I've been reading up on this, and I think the European Convention of Human Rights is a separate entity and a separate agreement from the EU, as I understand it. But Theresa May and several other ghouls in the government have referenced how they want to leave that too.
Correct.
And I think if you have to be a member of the EU, you kind of have to be a member of that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So when we leave the EU, that's the big barrier down, so they can just say, right, fuck it, we're off. No more treating people fairly and justly.
But that extends to things like employment law too. So, for example, a lot of the kind of wealthy elements of the Tory party who desperately want a no-deal Brexit because they want to turn Britain into an island of underpaid, underfed people just slaving away in their factories, essentially, to make them money. Because if they can get away with less regulation, and it's like, oh, well, no, you don't have to pay people a living wage, that is going to be all the more beneficial for people who have already got a colossal amount of money. So, again, once again, my solution is, rather than having a well thought out political solution that I'm going to suggest now, is like literally armed insurrection is the way to go. Is that an illegal statement? Did I just break the law? Am I inciting revolution or something? I don't know.
I don't think so. I think in a personal capacity, you could say almost anything.
That's fair. But I mean, I don't know. Strategically, it seems like a bad idea because they've probably got a load of guys with guns, and I absolutely don't. So yeah, in a sense, I'm slightly sorry to be so partisan about this particular issue, but this is one of the other reasons we've avoided it thus far, because the whole thing is obviously such a stupid, racist idea that was Cameron said, oh, we'll have a really simple binary choice on an incredibly complicated question, and then put it to a public vote, who were then lied to and then flamed up, by racist elements, dressing up the vote as one thing and as saying, oh, well, it's a referendum on immigration in the UK. And that's not what it is, but by appealing to those nationalist elements, by trying to placate that, this is where we're at now. We've, a spat between Eton's schoolboys has wiped however many billions of pounds off the value of the UK. So I am so angry about this. And so when you say we want to appeal to our Leave voting fans, I'm amazed we have any of those, frankly.
Well, I'm not entirely sure. I know for a fact we have Conservative fans, but they are not the same thing. There's not, there are pro-EU Conservatives out there who like the EU because it encourages trade and stuff like that.
Mm. But then the thing is, you might assume from what I'm saying that, oh, well, Ashley's obviously a commie Labour voter, but Corbyn is just completely useless as well. He's a Eurosceptic, so, he's not been a leader of the opposition. It's like, I don't trust anybody in Parliament at the moment. There isn't almost no one in there with any decency or integrity whatsoever. It's all about a desperate attempt to cling on to power. Ugh.
Yeah, I think we're sort of representing the two different places that people tend to be in. You are the righteous rage, and I am the exhausted and just want to hide. But we're seeing, I don't know for sure, but we are potentially seeing the effects of that on the availability of certain hormone products. There's definitely been confirmed an LS Solo shortage. We've had many reports that that's been hard to find, including getting a hold of it ourselves, because we're trans women. LS Solo gives us life.
Yes.
We approached the British suppliers, Mylan, the UK branch of the global pharmaceutical company, of a big global pharmaceutical company whose name I can't remember, asking for comment, and we heard nothing back. So it's only speculation when I say that this is Brexit related. Don't know for sure, but, you know...
Timing of it seems curious, if not.
Yeah, we import it from mainland Europe, I think Sweden. Like, you know, a whole bunch of EU stuff has enabled that flow of pharmaceuticals into the UK. So I would be very surprised if it's something else. But again, we'll see.
Indeed.
So Brexit, terrible fucking idea for our rights, terrible idea for our healthcare, terrible fucking idea for our employment. Just seems like a terrible fucking idea. So I'm sorry, Leave people out there. I really wanted to be less partisan on this, but
no, you didn't.
It doesn't feel like I can be. No, I really did. I really did. I want the show to be as welcoming to different viewpoints as possible, but then also balancing that with what we believe is right. And honestly, leaving the EU, I believe, is a terrible move for trans people. So that's the position I'm in, definitely.
Anyway, so to stop me from getting another froth on about that, let's move on to the next story. So, you know, kind of sticking with Parliament in a sense, there's been some not totally awful news coming out of the House of Commons recently, which might sweeten things up a little. Now, you may have seen, if you're a resident of the UK, over the last couple of weeks, the mountain of media shit that has landed on a primary school in Birmingham over its LGBT inclusive No Outsiders programme. A group of parents who are absolutely not reactionary bigots with an egregious homophobia problem have demanded an end to the No Outsiders programme and for the resignation of the school's head teacher. Because they say their delicate little flower children shouldn't have to suffer the indignity of learning about people who are different from them, and that the school is indoctrinating the children, which is some absolutely world-class, top-notch projection right there. But in a wonderful example of the Streisand effect combined with you have failed to read the room, the UK Parliament has responded to all of this by passing new regulations surrounding sex and relationship education in the House of Commons on March the 27th. The overwhelming majority of MPs voted in favour of it, with only 21 voting against, 10 of whom were from the Conservative Party. MPs who voted against it included Philip Davis, Rob Blackman, Sir Christopher Chope, Skeletor, Julian Lewis, Hitler's brain in a Dalek body, Dread Cthulhu, Senator Palpatine, and Sir Edward Lee. But these new regulations do still need to pass through the House of Lords, but this is a big step in the right direction, and obviously it's been welcomed by a lot of LGBT people and organisations. So if passed through the House of Lords as well, from September 2020, primary schools, pupils from primary school age onwards will be taught numerous family models, including the existence of same-sex parents. So, there we go. Out of a mountain of shit, sometimes flowers grow.
Yeah, I just wanted to say very quickly on this. We didn't report on this last time, most entirely down to me, essentially. Like, sometimes things get missed. We're very, very DIY. We had a pretty packed show last time, so apologies about that. We are here now. And, yeah, some good things came out of this, but things got really nasty. Things got ugly.
Did, yeah.
Like,
absolutely. There were videos of these protesters. And it's, people were claiming kind of religious liberty, but it was transparently just sort of bigotry, essentially, because just from
they're
the
scared
things
of their
kids
saying, being infected by,
by the
lessons.
gay, yeah. But it's just, but not even that. It's like the hypocrisy of it is the bit that gets to me, really, because what they're saying is, no, my child should only learn this and this in this way, and the universe is structured in this fashion, and blah blah blah, and then claiming that teaching them anything else is indoctrination. I just think there's some kind of irony in there, I think. But this whole thing did become incredibly nasty. Obviously, there's been a lot of organisations like Stonewall who have definitely been working in support of Parkview School, I think it is. But think, all these kids who are just going to school and having lessons with their peers, and outside there's an angry group of parents with signs and they're shouting, and it's like, what? The kids are not going to understand why that's a bad thing, why the parents are so bothered about these lessons that they've been having. It must be bloody terrifying for them, frankly, all the kids having to kind of run this gauntlet of angry, protesting.
I have an ill-informed, uneducated theory as to why this kind of thing keeps happening.
Because people are generally kind of awful?
No, I tend to be more on the positive side of people as a rule, but I genuinely think that this is down to a deep fear of people getting poo on their willies.
Right.
I think that genuinely the ground floor of a lot of homophobia, I think that the ground floor of a lot of transphobia is repulsion over the act of transgressing gender ideas. It's very, very base sort of revulsion that is nasty and horrific and inexcusable, especially in this day and age. And it's easy for us to forget that this happens outside of sort of queer-friendly cities that you and I live in. Like, I'm not entirely sure what the state of Birmingham is on the ground.
Well, I mean,
when it comes to
Birmingham,
this, but...
you know, for whatever else it is, it's definitely a city.
Yeah.
You know, and it does have a vibrant LGBT community. But this whole thing has just been incredibly frustrating to see, and it must have been, you know, but I think the people that you need to kind of read the words of on issues like this are LGBT Muslims, because the parents who've been protesting have been doing so under a veneer of religious respectability, when actually the words of the people who are kind of most affected by it, or, you know, I needed to hear this when I was at school, or this would have been so helpful for me when I was at school, you know, the parents aren't listening to those voices because, it just contradicts their sort of deeply held belief that homosexuality and being trans is immoral, which is something that some of the protesters have directly said. It's like, oh, no, it's immoral. And it's like, I don't understand how two people being in love with each other is immoral, but okie dokie.
Because poo on willies, Ashley.
But then, okay, I kind of see what you're saying.
That's why it tends to be the focus on, like, homosexual male relationships. I'm pretty sure anal sex is one of the main things when they say morally reprehensible or whatever garbage they spew. Like,
well, I mean, I'm sure they would consider a same-sex female couple just as kind of morally repulsive, but...
That's true, but I wouldn't like to rule out... I don't want to be come down as not sex positive. I think you know, lesbian and women-on-women relationships can also involve fecal matter if they so choose.
Okay, can we please... How on earth did we get here? Why are
Because I'm gross, the news is pretty bad, and I'm looking for any kind of humour I can take out of it, and I tend to go for the poo humour.
This was supposed to be the nice news story, though, because it has ended, of course, with the overwhelming majority of the House of Commons saying, no, okay, you lot, shut up, we're doing this. This is how it's going to work now.
Fair enough. This is good news. Absolutely. I'd like to end this by saying, in September 2020, keep an eye out on your local schools. If you have children yourself, obviously you're going to be invested. But even if you don't, I think it's up to us to make sure that this stuff goes off without a hitch. So keep an eye on it in your towns and cities and villages and
if there's
communes wherever you live. If
there's a group of people that are going to be turning up to protest the fact that kids are learning about things that are different from them, then that's kind of not good no matter what it's about. But let us move on to some people who are badly in need of a bit of education by the sound of things, which is the editorial team of The Economist. Because those cheeky scamps have, once again, chipped away at their own respectability, because alongside a news article about a recent court case in Japan, the publication tweeted out to its 23 million followers, should transgender people be sterilised before they are recognised? Just like that's a perfectly acceptable question. And this comes up a lot with a lot of the current media hostility, because the whole framing of it's posed as I'm just asking questions in the name of a debate. So framing it this way allows editorial staff to claim that they are creating balanced coverage. But in this case, as with so many others, there is a little bit more going on beneath the surface at The Economist. The finance editor Helen Joyce has a long and colourful history of transphobia and has weighed in on all of the usual subjects, including likening trans people to paedophiles, referring to hormone blockers as child abuse and mass experimentation, and in particular talking about trans athletes, claiming that a trans woman winning a medal would be a fool and a fraud. So this incredibly hateful and ill-informed person is a section editor at The Economist. It's not really surprising that the rest of their output seems to have been drinking some of that delicious turfy Kool-Aid. And there was a huge fracas, a furor, or whatever we call them, over this tweet, because quite rightly, framing it that way does kind of make people think, oh, well, are trans people human? You know, and it's kind of... it's the slippery slope argument. Is like, so where does this just asking questions thing stop? Plus, you know, you wouldn't necessarily see a mainstream publication like this headline should Chinese people be sterilized before they're allowed to work in the UK, or should literally anybody else, and there would be a tremendous moral outrage. And there was a moral outrage over this, as there should be. But again, it's hard to be kind of completely blaming The Economist and saying this is an aberration, because it's not. This is actually part of a pattern in the UK press at the moment where everybody's doing it, and this climate has become so hostile that places can print this kind of thing and it be considered legitimate and okay in the climate of this day and age, which sucks and it's terrifying. But it's also, as well, with calling hormone blockers mass experimentation. So if I could just digress slightly about how clinical research works, there's been a long catalogue of trials showing positive outcomes using hormone blockers dating back about 40 years from the Netherlands, because that's how science works, Helen. You watch something, you write down what happens, which is a bit like journalism. It's just not the way that you do journalism, you fucking hack. So, yeah, this was... when it came out, I was like, well, I'm not really surprised. The Economist have done this before, being aware of the context, but it was shocking, honestly, and just even in this day and age, you see that and it's like, oh, Jesus. So
I've been going on about what the trans editorial policy a fair bit so far, but I'd like to keep that up by saying that I think it's what the trans official editorial stance that sterilization of minorities is not a good thing.
Yeah. Never. Under no circumstances.
I think we need to make that clear, because apparently every publication, big and small, it would appear is questioning whether that is a stance that's worth having or not.
Yes. So,
how the fuck did we get here? This is ridiculous.
Obviously you were at Flair, so did you catch much of this and all of this stuff that kicked off around it? Because obviously there was a lot of social media reaction, and then a lot of mainstream media reaction to the social media reaction, and that whole cycle that happens. Did you catch any of this when it was happening?
But yeah, I've been sort of keeping up with this as much as I can, because I was astounded that this was even a thing. And I mean, there's not much more to say about it, is there? I guess the only thing to take away from this is, right now, I think the only place, I mean, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the only mainstream news publication that hasn't published something horrific about trans people at this point is The Independent.
I believe you are correct, although there's probably something in the archive that we've missed, but they haven't weighed in on it nearly as often, and in fact, a lot of the stuff that I've seen from them has been supportive. Obviously, The Guardian like to pretend they're the same, but then obviously their recent editorial that we spoke about a couple of months ago was like, nope, not you.
Yeah, so I think the thing to take away is get your news from The Independent. For your own sanity and mental health, try and avoid it from other sources for now. I mean, obviously, you can trust us. Yeah, you can trust us and The Independent. And a few podcasts that I'm going to go into later, because there's a whole bunch of queer and trans podcasts that have cropped up, actually, that I really want to get into. So yeah, there is a media out there that is safe. It's mostly DIY and homegrown with The Independent. I don't want to sound like one of those people who says, you can't trust the mainstream media, man. But the mainstream media is...
You can't trust the mainstream media, man, overall.
No, at the very least, bad for your mental health, and also bad for your, intelligence. It's not a great thing right now.
Not so much. But, so let's get... I'm just going to blitz through the final news story, and then we'll talk about the art. The art you've been doing. So, the headline I've jotted out for this one is Faded Sports Personalities in Turns Out They're Dickheads. Shock. So once again, this is another little chapter in a story that we've covered before. You may remember our discussion around trans athletes, which was a couple of episodes back, where several people had thrown a hissy fit because a trans person won a bicycle race. So now Paula Radcliffe, Kelly Holmes and Sharon Davis, who are all seemingly sports people of some kind, have said they intend to write to the International Olympic Committee to ask for further research into the residual benefits trans athletes might have. Ignoring, of course, that, as we've mentioned before, the IOC has investigated this thoroughly and has allowed trans people to compete since 2003. But they also recently stated that they expected to publish updated guidelines after a lengthy consultation with various stakeholders, which includes IOC Medical and Scientific Commission experts, science, human rights and legal bods, plus international federations and national governing bodies. So what we're kind of hoping is that when this letter lands on the doormat of the International Olympic Committee, they'll read it and respond to it with a, yeah, fuck off, we did the science and you can all shut up about it now, rather than bowing to be what is essentially political pressure from individual athletes. But we shall see how that all turns out. But again, it's just, ill-informed people who haven't been in the public eye for a bit making a semi-controversial statement that is not based in reality about trans people. So, yeah, there you go. Surprising stuff, or perhaps not.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Rachel McKinnon is doing God's work on this. She is constantly fighting against this kind of thing. So, yeah, check her out. Link to her Twitter in the description. She is brilliant. And I've actually talked to a few of our listeners around this. They've sent messages of concern. One in particular, hello you probably know who you are, told me that they are reluctant to go to their various sports clubs and gyms as a result of this. Like, there is a real world effect where now trans people who have previously felt welcome in these spaces no longer feel safe as a direct result. And I just like to say, fuck them. Go out, do the muscle thing as much as you can. Don't let these people take this from you, because you clearly love the thing. Go do the thing as best you can, please. Don't let this shit stop you from achieving your fitness goals.
Yeah. No, absolutely. But we have read that in a couple of places about the kind of chilling effect that this has had, and the recent kind of very public stuff with David Lloyd and Bannatyne's gyms, where someone said something on Twitter, and then it turns out that was actually not the policy, and it certainly wasn't the law. So that turns a lot of people off, and that makes people say, well, that's not a safe environment for me to go to. I'll stop going, or I won't even try, which is obviously the impression that I think I got from it, like, a long time ago, really, which is why I think I gave up on it as a concept for a way to spend my time. And, yeah, it just hasn't seemed like somewhere that would be overly welcoming, and that is not being helped whatsoever by people whose names you vaguely heard kind of weighing in on things that they don't actually have any particular expertise in, and they're just like, oh, well, it stands to reason, and, School of Hard Knocks, University of Life sort of thing, and it's like that. No, come on, guys. People have done the research here. I've spent years doing it. You want residual benefits, and it's always about, like, bone density and muscle mass, both of which are definitely and negatively affected by, if you or I were to be sporty, we're sort of starting several levels down from where we might have been pre-hormone replacement therapy, and it's just, it's infuriating.
You can always tell a hate group by how much they focus on bones. Yeah. You got the phrenologists who are obsessed with, like, black people's skull shape. You got all of this stuff. ContraPoints made the good point. She termed it Foppington's Law, where there's only a certain amount of time in certain hate spaces where bones will come up with bone shape.
I see.
And that's what's happening here, right? Like that's exactly right.
That's just making me think of that bit. Would you like to ride the bone train? Why are you doing this bit? We're all going to die. Yes, bit of an attempt at Rick and Morty there. Anyway, so that concludes the news, essentially. So yeah.
Yep. Don't worry, people. There is a palate cleanser coming. The whole of my experiences at Flare has been amazingly good fun, and we will get to that in a sec. But first, I've got some community news. If you're interested.
Yes, I'm interested.
Wonderful. Kicking off, there's a Kickstarter that we're going to link to in the description. It's for a short film called Birthday Boy. It's an uplifting short film about a transgender boy in an old girls' school. It's created by an entirely LGBTQ plus crew. There's a Kickstarter live now. Go give them a couple of quid. Link in the description. It looks pretty great. Next up, there's a new sexual health clinic for trans people that's being opened at King's College Hospital in South London, just down the road from me, near Camberwell. It's being done in partnership with Clinic Q, the trans clinic that operates out of 56 Dean Street in central London. It'll operate every Tuesday, 4 till 7, at the Caldecott Centre at the King's College Hospital. Services will include sexual health and general well-being, screenings, blood testing, STI screenings, hormone injections, counselling, and many other things. Links for more info in the description, and you may see me there, because me getting my injections has become a bit of an issue in my life. I don't entirely think this is due to Brexit. I think it's more due to the cuts that the Tory government have instituted. So you'll probably see me down there holding my little box of Decapeptyl, waiting to get jabbed in the bum. So see you there. And finally, remember Jackson King? Was a guest on the show a couple of episodes ago. He is a fantastic guy. We've been hanging out. Hey Jackson, how you doing? I'd like to give a shout out to his fundraiser. He's got a GoFundMe to get some of that sweet chest surgery. So help him out if you can. Link in the description. Throw him a couple of quid. Because, waiting around on the NHS is going to take forever. And, a boy's got to go and do the thing. So help him do the thing.
Awesome. Yes. Cool. Alrighty. So, I think...
sorry, I forgot one. There's one final one. A new podcast has emerged. It's called This Podcast is Queer. Very, very cool. It's run by... Very, very cool title. It's done by two trans guys roughly in the north of England. I'll provide a link in the description. Nice. I haven't given it a listen myself, but I've been talking to them today. They seem really cool. So yeah, want to give them a signal boost and say, go sub.
Nice. This podcast is queer.
Yeah, go make your podcast subscriptions queer as hell.
Love it. Okay, cool. Fantastic. So, let's do the cheerful stuff. So, you had a fun week or so, didn't you?
Yeah, I really did. It was really good. The BFI Flair Film Festival was a tremendous success, I think, for trans representation in the films. I saw a lot of movies. I'm not going to be able to talk about all of them, and we've got 8 interviews lined up. There were 2 other interviews I wanted to get in there, but we just couldn't squeeze them in with the time. So I'm going to release those on our website so you can listen to them and catch up on those 2 films. I would thoroughly recommend you do so. Again, they'll be on the document on our website as usually are, whatthetranspod.tumblr.com. And also, we're going to be following these movies over the coming months and potentially years as they come out in various forms. And we'll be keeping up to date on all of the goings on with these particular movies. But the festival itself was a huge success, I think, and let's just jump right in and talk about some movies.
All right.
So we're going to start off with Girl, which was, I think, the biggest trans movie there. Biggest as in the most well-known and very highly sought-after tickets. I caught it at the screening, and I can confirm the movie is actually as rubbish as you have been led to believe. It is a bad movie. Okay. It's directed by a guy called Lucas Dont. Stars Victor Polster as a trans girl, which is never a good move when you've got a cis guy playing a trans girl. And the movie's garbage, but I'm going to let film critic and trans extraordinaire Kathy Brennan, I'm going to let them explain exactly why the film sucks.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. Like, putting aside the trans stuff, I think it's just a really boring film. So, even just, like, for curiosity's sake, I wouldn't recommend seeing it. I know there's that thing about Nora Monseco, the inspiration of the film, saying that critics are trying to silence another trans story, which is not really what I was talking about when criticizing Girl. I kind of just want it to be over with in terms of like the discourse around Girl. It's like, it's a shitty movie. Sorry, am I allowed to swear?
Swear away, we swear all the fucking time. We're good. We are explicit on iTunes.
Excellent. Yeah, I kind of just wanted this moment to be over so we can move on and talk about things that are good, things that are worth talking about.
Have you seen anything that has been worth talking about?
Yes, I have. I've only seen 2 films so far. The first one, Call Her Ganda, I saw that on Sunday. I think it's a really painful documentary about Jennifer Lauder, this Filipina trans woman who was murdered in 2014. And the film is very graphic in the details about that case. But I think it's very necessary. I know there's a lot of discourse around LGBT narratives sometimes being trauma porn and stuff like that. But at the same time, I think it's vital for films to address the very real issue. Ganda does that really well by connecting the trans misogyny of this case with the history of neocolonialism in the Philippines, between the Philippines and the US, and also the racism involved. And also like the class issues involved, because the victim came from a poor family and was murdered by an American Marine.
So overall, looking at the program and stuff, what do you think of the trans representation at this festival this year?
I'm not sure is the honest answer. I guess I would never be 100% satisfied because I am a critic. So I'm kind of like the ungrateful kid who just wants more and more.
Sweet. So Kathy, where can we find your work? Is there anything you'd like to plug?
I guess I can plug my Twitter, although I may live to regret that.
We're on all the turf blocks and stuff. They mostly leave us alone because we have too many facts for them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So my Twitter handle is Town Tattle, but I also write occasionally for the BFI and also Time Out London and a bunch of other stuff. So if you like what I have to say, please definitely seek out my writing.
Cool, and we will provide links to a few examples of your writing and your Twitter feed in the notes as always. Kathy, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you very much, Michelle.
So she's not really, words are not being minced here, are they? About Girl in particular.
No, the only area where I would disagree with her is that the film, I believe, was very well put together. It was shot really nicely. The pacing was good. The problem was, it is trauma porn. Because I'm going to spoil it. This is the only film I'm going to spoil, because I don't think you should watch it. Don't bother. I'm just going to spoil it for you. Ends with a suicide attempt. And all of the stuff that leads to that point are awful. You're not going to leave this film feeling good. You're not going to leave this film feeling empowered. It's very much a cisgender director and mostly cis crew capitalising on the traumas and horrors that sometimes befall trans people, and I think it's kind of disgusting and gross. And whilst Kathy made a good point that there was an inspiration at the centre of it, I think there is a trans woman at the centre of it who was an inspiration for this story, but I don't think that saves it. So it's a garbage movie. I don't want to spend any more time on it. Don't bother with it. Go and seek out these other films I saw, which are great.
Yeah. Well, Kathy mentioned one of them, didn't she?
Yes. Next one we're going to cover, like Kathy mentioned, Call Her Ganda. We're also going to link in the description, as we do with all of Kathy's work. She is a pretty solid film critic. She's written extensively on the film Girl. We're going to link to our article about that, which is very enlightening. And that's the last I'm going to say of Girl. I'm drawing the line under Girl. Let's move on to the good movie she talked about, Call Her Ganda.
Yes.
Which is directed, produced, and written by a Filipino filmmaker called PJ Raval. It is an excellent movie. It covers the case of Jennifer Lauder, a trans woman of colour who lived in the Philippines, who was murdered by a US Marine. And I know what you're thinking, trans murder stuff, but this is a documentary that I believe is important and very much worth seeing. And I will let PJ Raval explain.
Hey, PJ, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So, Elevator pitch, tell us about the film.
So the film is called Call Her Ganda, which is a feature documentary centering around the events of Jennifer Laude, who is a trans woman in the Philippines, discovered dead in a motel room, brutally killed, with the prime suspect being a U.S. Marine. And we follow three women as they pursue some kind of accountability and justice.
So you were there probably right at the beginning.
I was, yeah. I mean, I was fortunate enough to be invited to go to the Philippines to screen some of my previous films. And long story short, I ended up on a panel for LGBT rights alongside attorney Virginia Suarez, who is the attorney who represents the Laude family. And that's where I really learned more about Jennifer Laude and kind of the case that was pending. And she made me really understand kind of what was at stake. So I started making the film shortly after that.
Cool. You said in the Q&A that the Filipino government was actually tracking your movements. Could you tell us more about that?
Well, I mean, yes. I don't know how uncommon that is because they do pay attention to people with cameras. But yeah, essentially at some point they let me know that they know where I have been filming or where I have been in the country.
Oh, well, that sounds kind of scary.
Yeah, I mean, but it didn't say more than that. Just to make sure that I register with them and let them know, where I'm filming. And part of that is because in the Philippines, they ask you to register with their what they call the press office, just so they can keep track of whoever is filming something in the country. So part of it was also just asking me to notify them where I'm going.
How valuable was Filipino trans journalist Meredith Talusan in the whole process?
Meredith is instrumental to this film. When I first met Meredith through mutual friends, and when I, discovered her and her writing, I kind of knew right away she would be an integral part in telling this film, because not only as someone who was born and raised in the Philippines, now living in the United States, but also as someone who's part of the trans community, I thought she would have an amazing perspective on this story from all the different viewpoints and perspectives. And then to, find out that she's also an incredible writer, it was like such a gift. And fortunately, she let me use some of her writing as narration in the film. Because I think Meredith is maybe the first journalist to really write a comprehensive overview of what was happening from the complexity that it deserved to be discussed.
You chose to show some pretty graphic pictures of Jennifer's body, whilst also pictures depicting the violence of the colonialism of the Philippines. Was that a conscious choice?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the choice to present graphic violence in the film was one that was made very carefully, and part of me wanted to include it because not only was it the actual photograph and documents that were circulated to the press and the family, and in the film you actually see the reaction of the family, specifically Nanay, Jennifer's mother, how she reacted to the photographs of the crime scene itself. But for me, it was also important because I really wanted audiences to understand the brutality of this crime and how this is not something that's accidental. This is not something that could even be self-defense in how brutal of a murder it was. But also, I think it's an image that people won't easily be able to erase from their memory. And I think there's something important about that, especially for audiences who maybe are just reading headlines and not really able to comprehend what was really at stake. I think after seeing this image, it's undeniable, the brutality of this crime.
So, to sum up, what are your hopes for the film? What would you hope audiences take from this film? Like, number one, what would you like people to walk out thinking?
I mean, though this film centers around a very brutal murder, I hope audiences will also find some kind of inspiration in seeing the reaction of these people to that murder. and recognizing that through this, solidarity and allyship among these communities and individuals, that's really how they're able to change the outcome of this trial and crime. I think if it weren't for that, it's very likely that the perpetrator could have been whisked away in the middle of the night on a ship. They could have never gone to trial. And I think all the combined efforts of these community organizations made it possible that this person was held accountable. And I think that is a model that all of us can kind of learn from, that, it really does take, for lack of a better description, it really does take the will of the people to change the outcome of a story like this.
Cool. Last thing, you've been a cinematographer. You are now fully fledged features documentary director. What's next for you, and where can people find the movie in the UK?
Yeah, after making this film, it really has been a life-changing experience for me, and I'm definitely committed to and interested in telling more stories coming from the Philippines or Filipino-American stories, Filipino diaspora films. And in terms of where people can see the film, they can go to our website, which is callherganda.com, and there'll be links there on how to see the film online or how to even purchase a DVD, perhaps.
Cool. I'll keep people updated as and when it comes out, because, like I said before, I think a lot of people in the UK trans community I think they need to see this.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Thank you very much,
Thank
PJ,
you.
for talking
Thanks
to me.
so much.
So yeah, this is an awesome movie. Meredith Toulousan has previously written for BuzzFeed and Vice and about stuff and has been covering this for years. She is an awesome journalist. Again, I'll link to her work in the description. What do you think?
I mean, the annoying thing is, I know we said we're not going to say that film's name anymore, but out of all these films, Girl is the only one that I've really seen. So I was not convinced when I thought, no, a documentary about a murdered trans woman. Do we need that? However, I think PJ Raval has honestly made a solid point, and a lot of it's down to the way you tell the story, and the shock factor does kind of come into it in terms of grabbing people's attention and making them understand. So I get it, I absolutely understand the, I guess, criticism of it and say, well, why are you making a film like that? But films like that and films that are tackling really, really harsh and difficult subjects, those films do have value. We need those things to show us these things in depth.
I think this film very much is a piece of journalism, I think, as its base, but it's also an effective form of activism, because I have never seen a film succinctly explain all of the things that go into the murder of a trans woman of colour in the Pacific South American region. And there are some shocking things in this film. There are some shocking imagery, but it's not sensationalizing. It's showing the reality of what happened. And in the Philippines, basically, US Marines have the run of the place. They can do almost whatever they like, and they've got the power of the government behind them. And so, as a horrible hangover of the colonialism that America did to the Philippines, and that is a major factor in her death. And it's an awful tragedy, and this film, I think, shines a light on it. I think this is a very important film that you should seek out when it becomes available near you.
Well, so the thing is about the accused being a US Marine kind of leads us neatly into the next film you wanted to talk about, doesn't it?
Yes, so the next film I saw was the movie Trans Millitary, which we have talked about before, as it's sort of been... the film is sort of been on the sidelines watching the train wreck that has been America's military policy when it comes to recruiting trans service members. You and I have both mentioned that we are not particularly fond of the military and what it does as an institution, but I think this film also has value and is also very well put together, and I will let Fiona Dawson explain more on that now.
Hey Fiona, thanks for sitting down with me. How are you finding Flair this year?
It's a pleasure, Michelle. Thank you very much for having me. I just landed this morning from the States, so Flair is fabulous. I've been here a few hours, not too jet lagged, and looking forward to joining the filmmakers' happy hour when I finish having this wonderful chat with you.
Oh, cool. So, tell us about the movie.
So the movie is a feature documentary called Trans Millitary. And as you might tell from the title, it's about active duty transgender service members. And so this was an issue that I became aware of after the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And I have been an advocate for a long time. By the way, I'm openly bisexual, cisgender, and but fight for the rights of everybody. And that we talked a lot about the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and so I did a lot of speaking engagements around that. And all the time we said LGBT people should be able to serve in the military. And it wasn't until after repeal that I became aware, well, actually, that had nothing to do with transgender individuals, and they were still banned due to outdated policy.
There has been a little bit of chatter amongst the trans community because there is a segment that, let's say, are not particularly fond of the military because of certain historical and current issues with... I guess I'd like to... I feel like I have to ask, where do you stand on this side of things?
I entered into it as an advocate. Gabe and Jamie, who I work with, are journalists. I come from the world of advocacy and want to use storytelling and media to change hearts and minds. But yeah, are you asking me about how do I feel about the military-industrial system and how it basically takes advantage of underprivileged communities?
Because like
you can get right at it. I'm very familiar with talking about this.
Like in the film, it's repeatedly said that there's 15,000 trans service members. It's the largest employer of trans people in the US. I have my own pet theories as to why that is, because you go in there, you have got employment, sometimes not great employment, but employment that you may not be able to get at home. What are your views on this?
And trans people are twice as likely to serve than cis people as well. Which is something else to consider. And of course, when you, and the way they arrive at around 15,500 is by looking at how many veterans identify as being trans, because you can't actually be documented and counted because you couldn't have been out as trans until very recently. So 134,000 US veterans identify as being transgender. So if you take however many million veterans come out and you know that 134,000 of them are trans, and then you can do the ratios to then how many active duty, and that's how we arrive at roughly around 15,500. I totally agree with you, and I do think it's horrendous that the military does, we live in a society where people in poverty, people in marginalised communities, see the military as their only way out. And I think that that is a larger question and a big societal change and shift that needs to happen. I have developed very strong relationships with trans service members who tell me all the time about how grateful they are to have the opportunity to be able to thrive, not only survive, but thrive within a job that they absolutely love. So if we see a society that where trans people are more likely to be unemployed, they have poorer access to healthcare, and of course in the US healthcare is a huge issue. We don't have a national health service in the US, like access to healthcare.
Blows my mind.
Which is another story. So you've got employment, and you've got healthcare, and you've got housing, right? Those top three things are probably some of our basic needs, but oftentimes they're denied to marginalised communities. And what does the military provide? A job, healthcare, and a home, accommodations, and more than that, like a job that you can excel at, a community, camaraderie. Like in the military, people don't care what gender you are. They care, can you do your job? Like, have you got my back? And so you will actually find that environments within the military, ironically, can actually be some of the most inclusive places. So that being said, I'm not going to say, this is, I fully support the military. No, I do think that we need to change society in general. So all of those basic needs can be met by marginalised communities without having to see the military as the only option. But I do know the military has been amazing opportunities for the service members that I know and love. Also, I'm an advocate. I want to change the world. I don't believe that gender is a binary. I know gender is a spectrum, sex is a spectrum, sexual orientation is a spectrum, yeah? But the military is the most binary workplace we will find, and not everybody thinks the same as I do. And maybe you agree with me as well, Michelle, about the spectrum, right?
Oh yeah, I'm down on the spectrum.
Right, thank you. So I'm thinking, okay, so how do I reach people who are so fully planted in the idea of a spectrum, in the idea of a binary, right? How do I reach those people to help them understand who trans people are? Well, in America, 78% of Americans think that being a military officer is a prestigious job. You know, if you are in uniform and you walk through an airport, you will have like probably half the people you walk past thanking you for your service. And they've got no idea who you are. They've got no idea what sex you were assigned at birth either, right? Yeah. But they have a respect for you. They, you know, you go to the States and you've got American flags flying everywhere, and you know, and God bless America, and like support our troops, yeah. So I know those people support our troops. So I want them to see our service members as troops first, and so that they have that buy-in and they have that respect. And then they can come to understand that, you know, trans people are not men wearing dresses going to go and harm your children in their bathroom, right? That's the trope that we need to squash. Yeah. So regardless of how I feel about the military, and I hate guns, I don't want nothing to do with guns, but I will fight for everybody's equal right to serve, and I will use the military to reach an audience that would not typically look at stories about trans individuals.
Cool. I found it interesting that that's something that maybe a lot of British people will not think of, that the military as a way to get some kind of acceptance.
Yeah.
I myself had not really thought of that. The way I came to it was not particularly fond of the military and the things that it can do.
Yeah.
But also I know that there's going to be a lot of trans people who do not agree with me.
Yeah.
And right now, a lot of trans people have their jobs on the line, and I think that's kind of the focus I like to bring to the reporting on the issue first. Maybe there's a discussion to be had later about the ins and outs of the military itself.
Can I add one other quick thing on that note as well? In America, if you look back in history, the military has actually been more inclusive before society. Society has had to catch up. So, for example, African American or black people could serve in the military before we had the Civil Rights Bill of 1964 that allowed equal protections regardless of race. Yeah, so you had more protection, or you had more rights serving in the military as black before you did in society. Women in America, women still don't have equal pay to men, and yet they do within the military. The repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell allowed same-sex families to have equal rights before they had equal rights through marriage in society. So it's kind of like this, the fact that we actually did achieve open trans service and we ended the ban, that happened before we have equal protection in society. So in the US, you can still get fired in 30 states for being LGBT or T. Yeah. We don't have an Equality Act. There are no federal protections in the workplace. You can be fired for being trans right now in America in 30 states. And yet, before this next ban goes into place, you can serve in the military.
So people can find the film on YouTube, Google Play, Amazon, and all the places?
Yes, and all the places. We had a TV broadcast debut in the States last fall in November. And then if they go to our website, transmilitary.org, and you can click on a link to see the film, and you'll find links directly to go watch it on, you know, your favourite platforms. So iTunes and Amazon Prime and maybe on YouTube and lots and lots and lots of others, but there's at least like 6 or 7 links on the website.
Fiona Dawson, thank you very much for chatting to me.
It's a pleasure, Michelle. Thank you so much. It was really great to meet you.
So I think she makes a very compelling point there, that, and also we went on to say later on that there is a culture in America that the military is a way for you to get respect in society, and that is definitely a factor when it comes to trans people signing up in the thousands that they have, because there's not that many places in America these days where you can get that a level of respect as a trans person. Every fight is, you know, it's hard. So
I know. I did note you sort of talking about the military-industrial complex, which is absolutely a valid criticism. But then, related to what we were just talking about as well, there is the kind of colonialist, imperialist, the things that, not just the fact that the military exists, but the way in which it is used. Not just down to the military-industrial complex, which absolutely is, disproportionately affecting poorer and marginalized communities who are using the armed forces as a way to get out. But then once they're in there, they're being, you're going to go and drop incredibly expensive and powerful smart bombs on a village where they've only just got out of the yurts, and it just... I think the colonial projection aspect of any military force's role can't really be overlooked. However, all of those things that Fiona and yourself just discussed are still true, and that's the world that we're in. And dreaming of a world where a military doesn't exist or isn't necessary or whatever, that's cool and everything. But we're here in this place now, and we're gonna have to move forward from where things are rather than from where we want them to be. So, it's not something that's necessarily an easy thing to think or talk about, but it is, it's there, it's real, it's valid, it's happening, and we can't ignore the fact that the US military as an employer for trans people is not going to have the status that it once did because but then that's depriving the US trans community of that avenue of safety and security and respect. And so what are they gonna do then? Where'd you turn at that point? So it's all so gosh darn difficult. So, but how was the actual film then? You saw it, didn't you?
Yes, the film is again very well put together. Fiona, as a cisgender woman, let the subject sort of lead the way in the film. She does not feature in it. I'm pretty sure at least 90% of the words spoken in the film are spoken by transgender service members. And I think the film is all the better for it, especially because people with our opinions, trans people with our opinions on the military as it is, we get an insight into why these people, these trans service members, are so eager to serve, and it makes total sense to me. And whilst I have personal issues with the military, I can also put that aside and say there is a whole bunch of trans people who are in trouble right now, and this film shone a light. And it was interesting because the film was supposed to have a happy ending with the ban being lifted by Obama, but then the spectre of Trump came along and kind of spoiled
that took care of that.
So I would recommend seeing the film. I think it's wherever you stand on the military, I think you'd stand to learn a lot. And I would say check it out. And Fiona Dawson, I love talking to her. She's very passionate. She is very into trying to change the world, using her words, and I believe her.
All right, nice. Okay, so what was next?
Next, it's a film called Man Made, which was directed and produced by a trans man called T. Cooper, who I very briefly emailed. He was not able to make it to Flair. He seems like a terrific guy, and he put me in contact with Mason Caminiti, one of the main subjects of the film. So I'll let Mason take it away.
Hello, Mason. How are you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good. So... tell us about Man Made. Tell us about the film and what your role was in it.
Oh, well, basically the film is about 4 subjects, their lives, in various ways, their personal lives, their professional lives, their lives as they prepare for the competition, this only trans bodybuilding competition. So it's their lives leading up to the competition. It's the only all transgender male bodybuilding competition in the world, which is in Atlanta, Georgia, in the United States. And it really gets into our personal lives, both present and past. And just there's a lot of layers to it. Our relationships with our families, our relationships with our significant others. And like I said, on the way to us preparing for the competition as well. So it's about the competition, but it's also about just for people in their lives and what they go through on a daily basis and long and short term being transgender or identifying themselves as transgender.
How was it putting yourself out there like you do in the film? Because, I mean, not wanting to spoil it for anybody who may want to watch the film, but you put yourself out there.
Yeah. I think, the director T. Cooper is transgender himself, and I think that there are some trans films out there, not a lot, and there are even less trans films made by trans filmmakers. So I kind of jumped at the chance because I thought that he could really offer a really unique perspective, and there was this sort of just a connection of trust there, because I felt like he really knew what it was like to identify as transmasculine. And so I trusted that he would really portray myself and others in a very honest, respectful manner. And I think that he did a really good job with that. So, like I said, I really jumped at the chance, and I really thought that nowhere did I ever waver in that at all whatsoever. He has a really great way with people. And I think that comes through in the film with us really opening ourselves up. I think that's really a testament to who he is as a person and as a director.
So how did you get into bodybuilding? Like, what was the key thing that got you involved in this world?
Sure. I loved The Incredible Hulk when I was a kid. There was just something about it I liked. I guess I'm a little bit of like a superhero, Marvel, DC comic nerd a little bit. Proudly.
We will get on very well. We'll get on very well.
Good. And I proudly say that. And so I had an obsession with the Hulk even at like 3 or 4 years old. And as I got older, I really started to look at the sort of the golden age of bodybuilding, 70s, 80s, Arnold Schwarzenegger and Frank Zane and Franco Columbu and a couple others. And I started to realize that I could sort of transition or modify my body before I can actually start my transition with testosterone. So I started to work out on a fairly regular basis. It did help me with my athletic performance, sort of have that edge before I did transition. And even afterwards, it was just a really positive driving force in my life where I could spend time in the gym on something where I felt like I was getting somewhere. Because so often I felt as if I wasn't doing anything with myself. I was floundering because I didn't have the money or opportunity to take the next step in my transition. So this is sort of a way of really empowering myself.
So how's the reception to the movie been so far?
It's been amazing. We just had a showing in Cleveland actually last night and today. And last night it sold out. And today we had a really good showing. It didn't sell out, but we had a very good showing. But I've been to different parts of this country and some Skype calls with other countries where it was screening. And people seem to really like it a lot. They really do love it, whether they're allies or identify somewhere in the trans spectrum. They feel like trans people are represented well, and they feel as though if they're an ally, they really learn a lot about just the varying degrees of being trans, what that means, the experience, what some trans people have to face. So it's been very positive. And then in my own life, I come from a very, very conservative background. My father is almost 80. He's very conservative politically. He's very Catholic. And he wanted to see the film for the longest time, and I didn't know how I felt about him seeing it because our relationship has been on again, off again with my parents and I. And I finally told him about a screening that was near him, and he saw it, and he left me a voicemail, and I really did not even want to listen to the voicemail, but I was like, oh, what is this going to say? What is he going to say on it? And he actually said that he was very proud of me, that he really enjoyed the film a lot. He thought it was really a wonderful film and well done. But the fact that he said he was proud of me, I mean, that's the first time he's told me that in my life. So it's had just this tremendous tremendous impact in my own life. And I'm hoping that, you know, it has similar impacts with other people in their life. Like I said, whether they identify somewhere in the trans spectrum or as an ally.
Do you think you would have made the film if do you think you would have signed up if this was a cisgender filmmaker who approached you?
I don't know if I would have signed up if it was someone who didn't identify as trans, because I knew at documentaries, you know, I knew that, you know, he was going to be filming me up close and personal. He was going to come to, you know, my home city where I live. He was going to interview people in my personal life, my wife, my mother-in-law, my sister. So I also just like T as a person. Like I was saying before, he just comes across as just such a kind, caring, honest person. He's got a great sense of humor too. And I think those are all things that made me feel very comfortable. But I think him being trans allows for that that I don't think a lot of films have. That, you know, it's not just myself, but I know the other guys that were in the film felt the same way. They felt that they could really open up more because there was that level of trust there. And I think it served and provided to be a certain level of authenticity I don't think that could have been reached otherwise.
Mason, thank you very much for talking to me. Is there anywhere that people can follow you? Any social medias or websites you want to plug?
Yeah, sure. It's Mason Caminiti. I'm on Instagram, Twitter. I have a Facebook page. So it's Mason, Mason, and the last name is Caminiti.
Okay, brilliant. I'll provide links to all of those in the description of this episode. Mason, thank you very much for chatting to me.
Thank you so much. I love your show, and you two are absolutely wonderful. Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Anytime. Thank you.
All right, take care.
So I learned a lot about the trans guy experience from this film, and also talking to Mason, because, like, as trans women, there isn't really that much apart from maybe getting a haircut or, you know, styling our hair and getting some shapewear and stuff, and, you know, the old chicken fillets to, you know, moderate our bodies before we get access to healthcare. And I found it very interesting to see that the bodybuilding world and the gym world offers a way for trans men to start almost immediately after coming out, working towards the body they want by strengthening and defining their muscles. And I found that fascinating. And the movie itself is really uplifting. It's really empowering. I would recommend, like, trans guys everywhere to see it. I think it's great.
Absolutely. And so he's a trans man himself, isn't he? And so I think he's mentioned in the interview the importance of trans people telling their own stories, right?
Exactly. And it was really, you could tell that this was made by a trans guy from that viewpoint. And I'm so down with trans filmmakers coming out and telling our stories in a way that cis people just won't be able to. Like, because I have all the respect in the world for Fiona Dawson. I have all the respect in the world for PJ Raval. I think they are both very talented, incredible filmmakers who are passionate and have their hearts in the right place. However, there are things they just won't be able to see. There will be a viewpoint that they are impossible. It's impossible for them to get to. Whereas T. Cooper, as a trans guy and also a talented filmmaker, separate from that, he managed to get to places that I don't think a cis director could. And so, again, I would recommend this movie.
Nice. Yeah, so out of all of the ones that you've said so far, that's the one that I'm like, oh, okay, I want to watch that. So, cool. All right, up next,
we are rattling along very quickly here. Mostly because we have like an hour of interviews in this, and this is going to be a 2-hour episode. Yeah. So I'm just going to rattle along and give the basic ground floor review. The next film is Little Miss Westie. It was co-directed by Joy E. Reid, a genderqueer filmmaker from New York, and Dan Hunt, also I believe he is a cis guy, director from documentary filmmaker from New York. And yeah, let's just jump into the interview I did with Joy, who is a delight.
Why don't you tell us about the film? Well, what's it about?
Little Miss Westie, having finished this film, you would think I would have a pitch for it by now. But it's about a family who has 2 transgender children. They used to have a girl and a boy. Now they have a boy and a girl. And it revolves around a local beauty pageant. Luca, who is older, is coaching his little sister, Ren, through her experience with the Little Miss Westie pageant. And he knows about it because when he was 11 and living as a girl, he competed in the pageant.
Yeah, that's the whole pageant thing is not something we really have here. So we're talking tiaras, ball gowns, talent segments, all of that stuff.
Yep, the whole nine. The actual pageant was something like 4 hours long, and it was a grueling experience for everyone on the crew. But and certainly for the participants of the pageant. But
yeah,
it's think Little Miss Westie, and think Little Miss Sunshine, and it's not too far off. It's like a small town version of Little Miss Sunshine.
Cool. The thing that struck me when I was watching it was how little the pageant was actually in it, because it seemed like you sort of followed the family story, and that was sort of the undercurrent that sort of pinning the main narrative all the way through. That was where it was going. But it seemed to, for a good 80% of it, it was just letting the subjects talk, which I really liked. Was that something you intended to do from the start, or?
Well, I want to first off, I want to say that I'm not the only director. I have a co-director, Dan Hunt, who it was actually his project first, and he called me. And my favorite quote of this is that he said, "I'm too old and lazy to do this by myself anymore. Do you want to split this movie?" And I said, "Let me meet the kids." As soon as I met the kids, I fell in love and said, "Absolutely, let's do this thing." And he had envisioned it as a short, and it was only going to be about the pageant. But the more time we spent with the family, the more it became evident that there was more story there than just this little thread of the pageant. It's a beautiful story vehicle to hang a broader story on, because pageants have a beginning, middle, and an end, and there's tension there, everything you could want in a story. But it allowed us to present the kids as kids and just being who they are, and we get to see their struggles, but it's not just about their struggles. It's also about their joys and about them becoming who they want to be.
Whilst following around Luca and Ren, was there anything that surprised you about the trans kid experience? Like, did you have preconceptions going in, and were they met or were they smashed?
Well, after having met the kids once, it was very clear that they were genuine, relatively unfiltered, and completely incapable of being anything but themselves. And so it's less about, for me, it was less about their trans experience and more about them just being really interesting kids who are walking a difficult path. So anything that happened with them was a surprise. I mean, when you see the film, you'll see Ren is very much her own person. I think what Dan and I learned is that neither one of us is capable of parenting our way out of a wet paper bag.
What were the big takeaways from hearing the stories of the trans kids and the other trans kids you met, and the parents of trans kids? Like,
listen to your kids. That was all of the parents who listened to their kids had far fewer struggles than people who were in huge amounts of denial about what their kids were telling them. Ren rarely said this on camera. It was very difficult to get her to. She was great in the verite scenes, because she could just easily forget we were there. But sometimes when we sat her down to do an interview, she got very self-conscious. But she would say quite often, like, if you're not listening to your kids, you're basically killing them.
You've just inked the deal for distribution, so you're not quite sure when it's going to come out on a more wide release yet. Is that right?
That is correct. We are with Passion River Films, and we're... honestly, the ink's not even dry on the contract, so I can't really say exactly when we will be available either in the US or the UK, but I think within the year.
Okay, well, you listener, we'll keep you informed when it appears.
Please and thank you.
Yeah. Joy, thank you so much for sitting down with me.
Michelle, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And nice movie. Good job.
Many thanks. You've been a delight.
Now, when Joy says the main takeaway is listen to your kids, that comes across so much in the film. The film is incredibly uplifting. I watched it and I did a little joy cry at the end, because I'm a sucker for trans kids being themselves. Like, you have Luca, the trans boy, the teenager, who is just a typical teenager, a bit moody, playing on his phone, you know, but also he's very supportive of his little sister, Ren, the trans girl who's entering the pageant. And I sort of entered it into it thinking, kid pageants, don't know what I think of that. That's a world I'm not familiar with. It's not something we have as a culture in Britain. But, you know, I saw that it could be a very good thing for a trans kid to come into their own. It's a way for them to have fun with their gender expression. And I don't think I have a problem with that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think that... I remember because again, I've not seen this film, but we were discussing it beforehand. And I pointed out the kids pageants thing. What are you even doing that for? But from what you said and from what Joy said, I think I want to check that one out.
Yeah, they've only just sorted out the distribution. So again, with all the films, we are going to release information as it comes out about where you can see these films. Because, like I've said about 1,000 times, I think all these films are important, and I think trans people seeing them, especially more isolated trans people, would benefit tremendously from seeing all of these stories. I think this kind of thing is... And also it opens up the idea that trans people could go and make films themselves telling their own stories. And that leads us nicely into my chat with Christine Clark.
Yes.
She is something of a legend when it comes to trans filmmakers. She's a documentary maker with over 70 movies to her name. Her career began with the Channel 4 documentary Sex Change, Shock, Horror, Probe that came out in 1988 as a response to a lot of the salacious sensationalism of transgender people doing the quote-unquote sex change thing in the papers, which we don't have any of that going on today. So
No, far from it.
So, yeah, let's just, again, jump right into Christine Clark. You had a very prolific career. You've been in the industry for, like you said, 33 years. How's the industry treated you as a whole, as a out trans woman?
On the whole, the industry's... The people I've met in the industry, to my face, have treated me really well. Of course, you never hear about the jobs you don't get because of being trans and the transphobic. I mean, I have had transphobic comments in the workplace. I've had lesbophobic comments in the workplace. I've had misogynist comments in the workplace. But on the whole, I've been fortunate to work with people who have a queer, even if they're not queer, have a queer sensibility. Especially when I worked at the BBC for Arena, because they, you know, the two guys who run it, Nigel Finch and Anthony Wall, just had a subversive sensibility anyway to filmmaking. And it was, you know, in one way it was my dream job, because you could make queer subject matter or any subject matter that looked at the human condition, but from a skewed perspective.
Yeah, you mentioned Sex Change, Shock, Horror, Probe. That came out in 1988 and was the first documentary on trans issues by a trans filmmaker. How was the response at the time? I can imagine it was a complicated time.
It was a complicated time for a variety of reasons. The fact that, you know, being trans, making it, obviously, brought up various problems for the commissioners because they didn't think it could be objective enough as a filmmaker. My argument was every other film that I'd ever seen about the transsexual experience, at that, because transsexual was the name then, was treating us as the other, whereas this wasn't the other, this was us, this was me making a film about people who I could relate to. But also not just relate to through experience, but also it wasn't just an experiential film. It was a film looking at the political, social, psychological experiences that people underwent, including prejudice, including the psychological aspects, including the medicalization aspects of it. And I can tell you a funny story when I was making this film, if you wish.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not in the film because the psychiatrist wouldn't give me permission, because I think once he'd said it, he realised he'd fucked up in some way. Because I asked him how you gauge if somebody is transgender or transsexual. And he said, well, we break them down. I didn't say we break you down. He said, we break them down into 3 categories. There's the tertiary transsexual, who is usually men who've lived a very successful life, and at the age of 50 or 60, they decide they want to become a woman. And they usually stay with their partners, and they don't want any surgery whatsoever. That's the tertiary transsexual. The secondary transsexual is very much the same. Men who've been successful in their careers but decide they want to become a woman and have the surgery, and they may or not stay with their spouse. And then there's young sissy boys like yourself.
Yep, that sounds right.
And I was like, obviously all the crew knew, my history, and because the reason why we were making the film, but, I didn't know whether to laugh or to just hit him or what to do. And anyway, he wouldn't sign the release form after that, because I think he'd realised that, the response, I've got to admit, the response, the press response was great in some respects, shocking in others. Obviously shocking because he came out with the old cliches that we all know, these fellas in frocks and all that kind of stuff. Some of the press, obviously the press like The Guardian were very supportive and saying this film needs a wider audience. Thankfully it did get a wider audience. And it got the highest viewing figures for a single documentary on Channel 4 that year, which was astonishing. But also it went on a festival circuit and was seen all over the world. And so I travelled the world talking about it and talking about the issues of visibility and trans, and that, because I think people had this idea that all trans people were just, just wanted to be glamorous and wear high heels and frocks and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, we do sometimes, but not all the time.
Yeah, events like Flair, it's absolutely in context.
Yeah, that's it.
But not on a Sunday.
Not on a Sunday, yeah. So that's the thing. So if you, but to be, I've got to, I think it was harder for my parents because they got the backlash of it. The tabloid press trying to get the sordid details or the details about my personal life growing up when I was a child and stuff, which is relevant to me and relevant to my parents, but not relevant to a fucking tabloid newspaper.
Now, I was going to actually ask about your time on The Danish Girl and also Colette. Were you involved with Colette?
I was, yes.
So what was your role on the production of those?
On The Danish Girl, it was basically to the producer, Gail Mutrix, who had been trying to bring this story to the screen for 20-odd years. I think they needed to tick boxes, basically. I think it's hard to make a film about transgender themed film nowadays if you don't tick the boxes with some people who are trans on the film. So my role was to try and get as many trans people involved in the production as well. So like Rebecca Root, I suggested they contact Jake Raff, I suggested they contact various other people. I read, and also to read the script for authenticity. Having said that, the number of suggestions I made weren't taken up by, not so much by the producer, who I had a good relationship with, but by the director.
Tom Hooper.
Tom Hooper, yeah.
That's a shame, because I loved his Les Mis, and I loved the King's Speech and stuff. It's just, I don't know, disappointing that he didn't, I guess, he stuck very close to the script of Les Mis. It's a shame he didn't stick very close to the script of trans representation.
Exactly, yeah. And I think, from, you know, having read the story of Lily Elbe and knowing the time that they, you know, these were two people who were artists who were living outside of society as well. You didn't see any of the sexuality or the passion in their relationship. You didn't see any of the, you know, and also the opening where, you know, you run your hand over a dress and automatically you become trans, as, a bit, as if by magic.
Yeah, like I didn't wear a dress till like 6 months after I came out, you know? Like...
you know, so there's things like that. I think, and, you know, it's difficult with, you know, I think Eddie Redmayne gave it his best shot, but it missed the mark because it was a bit too winsome and a bit too Prince Diana-ish for me.
I like that.
Thing. The Colette film is, again, I think the difference between Wash and the difference between Tom Hooper is Wash is a gay man, so he came to it with a queer sensibility, whereas Tom Hooper is a straight white guy who didn't have any sensibility about the subject, whereas Wash brought a sensibility even to Colette. And what Wash wanted to do within that film, with the diversity representation, you know, is I don't believe in casting trans people just in trans roles. I think trans, you know, if you're trans, all roles should be open to you. And even, like, you know, if you're cisgendered, I don't have a problem with cisgendered people playing trans roles as long as they play them with authenticity and believability, you know, because in the end they're actors and that's what actors do. Ideally, I would love to see trans people. I would love to see trans people get more higher profile roles and play trans roles because that is a stepping stone. But I want to see trans people play all roles. That's the.
So you previously said, I believe at Flair in 2015, that you strive to challenge stereotypes and ensure individual sexuality and trans identity are not withheld from them in the films you make. Has there been a problem with this when it comes to trans representation in the industry, do you think?
Did I say that? Well, for me, when I'm a filmmaker. If it comes up that if the subject matter is about trans, I come out as trans. If the subject matter is about, I made a film about pigs, the representation of the pig in art, literature, film, and television. Being trans never came up during the making of that. So, you know, if it came up in a conversation, I would talk about it. If it comes up, if somebody makes a transphobic comment, it comes up. You know, I've been out, I made a film, you know, Sex Change was probably my coming out film as being trans. So once it's come out and then once it's on the internet, I mean, the internet was in its very early days then, but once it's gone into the press, there's no hiding. So anybody who wants to know anything about my career knows. But also I believe that, you know, if it's a bit like being gay, you know, gays in the closet in Hollywood has gone on for years, still goes on. You know, I don't know if there's any trans people. I think I'm fairly good with my trans radar, but there may be trans people who are big in Hollywood who I had no idea, you know. But I think, you know, visibility is a stepping stone to acceptability. That's what I think.
Where would you like to see trans representation in film go from here? Like, well, what do you think the next step should be?
Me winning an Oscar.
Nice. Yes. You know, Meatloaf's one of the judges. I'll tell Meatloaf to vote for you.
Oh, good. So, I mean, where would I like trans representation to be? I'd like trans representation to be just be on a par with everything else. You know, I think it's important that, you know, we've seen people, you know, we saw, what's her name win for the Brandon Tina story. I'd like to see somebody trans winning the Oscar for playing a trans character. That's it. Not somebody, an actor who's cisgendered being brave to play.
Yeah. So what's next for you? Have you got any projects coming soon?
I've always got projects on the go, but I never talk about them until they happen.
Fair enough.
I don't want to jinx them.
Okay, well, we'll follow you around and tell listeners as and when things get announced. Where can people find your films if people are interested in looking them up?
Well, on YouTube. I mean, everything's on YouTube now. I mean, I don't have as I say, I don't build brand Christine, so I don't have my own website or anything like that. But you can find most of my films on YouTube. Not just the queer ones, but, the ones about smashing pigs and the history of the British sex film, for instance.
Christine, thank you very much for talking to me.
You're very welcome. Good luck.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
So it was good to hear that, like, a career in film is entirely possible, and not just a trans filmmaker telling trans stories, but also I had to cut out a lot of the interview because we talked for a good 30 minutes. Like, she's fascinating, so I had to cut it down for time. But she's made documentaries about a whole bunch of subjects, including the practice of prosecuting people with HIV, people who are HIV positive, because they transmit the disease, which is a horrific practice that still goes on. She's covered that extensively in her most recent films. And I'll be linking in the description to as many films as I can find on YouTube, obviously. But yeah, and she's had a fascinating career.
Well, I mean, I'm with her on the whole Danish girl Tom Hooper part of it, like,
Yeah, it does sound like that. The behind the scenes was a bit of a shit show because trans people were there, but Tom Hooper did not listen.
Oh, well, what a surprise. So...
it's good to hear that Colette was her work on Colette is a lot better. I don't know if I've talked about this before, but I thought that was a really good film. It features a sort of maybe non-binary trans masculine character. It's not really stated, and it also features actor Jake Graff, who also, by the way, had a film at the festival called Listen, which I'll be linking to. Unfortunately, we couldn't hook up and get an interview sorted out because he's a busy guy. Him and his wife and co-writer on the film, Hannah Graff. But yeah, Rebecca Root was in there in Colette, and neither of them were playing trans characters. At least they didn't say they were trans. They appeared to be playing cis characters, which was monumental. And I think that is... Christine kind of had a hand in making that happen, so good on her. She has had a fascinating career, and yes, alright, that's the features that I saw that were trans-related. There was a couple more. There was JT Leroy, which I didn't get a chance to see, and a film called Tucked, which I chose not to see because there was a non-binary drag queen character in it, but they were played by a cisgender person, and they were not the main focal point of the film. And I decided to cover more trans and non-binary filmmakers.
Yeah, no. And I support you in that editorial decision. So...
And our final two are about two short films that really stood out to me in a big way. The first one, Framing Agnes, directed by Chase Joint and Kristen Schilt. Chase Joint is a trans filmmaker who resides in San Francisco. Again, we chatted for about half an hour. Loved talking to him. He has made this really interesting documentary about trans people from history, and when we cut to the interview, I'll let him explain the stuff that went on there, but very, very interesting way of telling the story in a really good way. He assembled a monstrously talented cast. Like, you had Zachary Drucker, who's famous for She Gone Rogue and Transparent, Angelica Ross, who is in Pose, which she's fantastic. You got Silas Howard,
she is.
An actor who's been in By Hook or By Crook and A Kid Like Jake, and Max Wolf Valerio, who is sort of a bit of a legend in his own right in the American trans guy community. So I'm going to let Chase jump in and explain all of the things. I'm in danger of fangirling a little bit because I really enjoyed the movie.
Thank you.
Would you like to tell the listeners all about it?
Sure. So Framing Agnes is born out of a multi-year collaboration with my friend Kristen Schilt, who's a sociologist at the University of Chicago. And early on in our collaboration, she told me about this now very canonical case of this person named Agnes in sociology, who is a person who approached the UCLA Gender Clinic in the late 1950s, and I'm not sure how much of the plot you want me to reveal, but it sparked an incredible amount of conversation between us, Kristen coming from trans studies in the underbelly of sociology and academia, and me coming to trans studies as a trans person who was making films and documentaries and writing nonfiction about similar themes. And we thought, well, I wonder what we could do together. And we didn't really have an answer to that question, but what we did was eventually gain access to a private archive of the doctors who were responsible for producing Agnes's case in the 1950s.
Right.
And we spent many years in the archives helping to organize, looking around, having conversations, and eventually, in an incredibly serendipitous, happened upon not only all of the transcripts from Agnes's interviews, but interviews and sessions of other trans and gender nonconforming people who we didn't know existed, who did not appear in published research, and then from that realized there was so many ways that we could try and tell a different story.
I imagine that as a trans man, these stories are close to your heart. How important was it to you to tell these stories?
Well, I think that we are living in a cultural landscape where the majority of films made about trans people are made by non-trans makers. And so for me, it seemed like a really incredible opportunity to have trans people tell trans stories and really to change the landscape of documentary for that reason.
Awesome. What about common ground to your experience as a transgender person?
Mm-hmm. So the two transmasculine subjects in our film know each other. They're friends. And they talk about each other in the interviews with doctors. They say, "My friend Henry," and reference each other in stories about their own self-understanding. And I really resonate with that. I feel like I transitioned in San Francisco and I came of age within a community where there were lots of other transitioning people, transmasculine people in particular. And I really resonated with that collaborative meaning making, where we were all thinking about gender and pronouns and bodies and surgery and hormones together and stumbling and fumbling and feeling weird. And, it was a shared experience. It wasn't something that, even in times where it felt stressful or depressing or isolating, I knew that in some ways I wasn't alone. And to understand the friendship that was being showcased really resonated with me.
Cool.
And then, the geek in me also feels really excited by the fact that Max and Silas in their own right are incredibly influential people in trans masculine history. And, there's this beautiful moment in the film where Silas looks at Max and says, "You were a hugely important person in my coming of age." And it was this generational nod to the fact that Max had been, to borrow Laverne Cox's language, a possibility model for Silas as he was coming of age. And I looked to Silas and Max for those very...
There may be a whole bunch of our listeners who are thinking, I'd like to go make a film, I'd like to get it screened at Flair. Is there any wisdom you can impart that would help them along?
Oh yeah, I'm happy to pay suggestions forward. So, one of the best pieces of advice that I got early on in my career was surround yourself by people who are doing what you want to be doing. So, if you want to be making movies, try to find ways to be around and with people who are making movies. So whether that's volunteering and getting experience on sets, or whether that's showing up at film festivals, or whether that's, taking classes if you're able, which is, classes it should not be top on the list. I think classes are only one way to learn how to make movies, and it's certainly not necessary. But really just being in the presence of people who are having the kinds of conversations and making the kind of work that you want to have. And then, to be honest, my next suggestion is just make the work. Don't worry about it. Don't worry if it's bad. Everyone thinks that something they made is awful. It's just not that big of a deal. It's a way to continue to learn and take risks and experiment and network. And I really believe that at this stage, no one should work in isolation, and that the bigger team you can build and the collaborative possibilities are the way of the future.
Go write that script.
Yes.
So, where can people follow your work in the future? You mentioned that you want to turn Framing Agnes into a feature.
Yeah, so we are turning Framing Agnes into a feature. And I am easily findable on the internet at Chase Joint across all platforms. And Framing Agnes has a designated page on my website, and then we will also build out its own platform as it becomes a feature. So you can follow it by following me for now, and then we'll give it its own handles down the line.
Links in the description. Is there anywhere that people can see the current short of Framing Agnes, or is that going to be sort of locked down till and incorporated into the feature?
Yeah, so the short is on lockdown currently. That said, if people are programmers or social service providers or academics, if there are people who want to be using the film to think about trans representation or trans history, they can always reach out to our team and we can work out ways to make it available.
Wonderful. All right, Jay, so let's wrap that up. Thank you very much. Looking forward to the feature and more history.
So the most exciting thing is that this movie is going to become a feature, and I had to cut out references to this in the interview for time, but Morgan M. Page, friend of the podcast, a trans historian, is going to be involved. She has been co-writing this feature with Chase, and it's going to be phenomenal. And obviously, we will fangirl all over it and let you know when that comes out.
When it happens. So, and I am actually familiar with the story of Agnes. I've read about that. I think it was in a Julia Serrano book where there's this case study, who was sort of often cited and sort of fawned over in that sense at the time. So I kind of read that story in the historical sense, so I'd be very interested to see the film. So yeah, cool. Love it. And yeah, and if Morgan M. Page is involved, because she is a writer, like first and foremost, isn't she? As well as one from the vaults. She's been involved in other things. So yeah, that'll be a good bit of work. Keep your eyes open for that, folks.
It really will be. And I've said this before on the podcast, but nothing beats internalized transphobia more than seeing the stories of trans people in history. And again, this is told in a really interesting way, and just the way that the filmmakers stumbled upon this cachet of trans history. And it's interesting that that the one that was released was the white trans woman. And they sort of...
Yes, that is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, because, you had stories of trans guys and trans women of colour and all sorts in there that never got told. And those stories are just as important, if not slightly more, because of how they're not covered. So, again, great movie. Really enjoyed it. Really gave me good feelings. And I showed it to Jackson the other day, actually, and he was elated by it, because that's the effect it has. It's such an important film. Again, I've said that too many times, but yeah, this BFI Flair, the quality bar was high. It was such a wonderful experience to cover it.
Lovely. Well, and you've got one more interview to go, haven't you?
Yes. This is gonna be about the short film Anemone, written by and directed by Amru Al-Kadi, who is sort of a drag performer, artist, basically storyteller.
So yeah, I'm just going to jump to Amru and let them explain.
Amru, thank you very much for sitting down with me.
No worries, thank you for having me.
Cool. So tell us about the movie. Tell us about Anemone.
So Anemone is a short film I made last year, which is about a non-binary teenager who's from a Nigerian Christian household who doesn't have the language to express their non-binary identity. They're having gender dysphoria, but they just don't know how to express it. And it's their passion for marine biology that helps them to articulate their gender identity. So by kind of understanding the hermaphroditic nature of like anemones and loads of sea life and the kind of formless and fluid nature of it, they decide to come out as an anemone to their family. It's also looking about someone trying to blend their heritage with their queer identity. So it's about someone trying to see their religion as something queer as well. And yeah, so that's the film.
Where did the idea come from? What was the seed that got you started? Would you say that Anemone is a pretty typical experience for non-binary people, or?
To be honest, the initial experience, the initial thing that motivated the film was that I used to be really obsessed with marine biology and actually worked at a tropical and marine shop as a teenager and was very obsessed, and it was definitely one of my first articulations of gender dysphoria, just by really kind of connecting to these creatures. So that's the idea of a teenager kind of coming out through marine biology from personal experience, and there was something about like the fabric of Nigerian textiles that really reminded me of coral and fluidity. And my experience in Nigerian churches, because of friends who go and worship, and I went to sort of observe a lot, is that they kind of feel like aquariums, like they're very colourful, really joyous, and so I just wanted to marry the two together.
Do you have any advice to give to any potential wannabe filmmakers out there in the trans and queer community?
Yeah, my advice would be that for your first couple of films, just try and do it yourself. I know that sounds a little bit scary, but before you start maybe asking for money from the BFI or whatever, you might get a bit of a shock just because it's just a lot of cis people sort of suddenly giving their thoughts, and a lot of those thoughts are amazing, because there are some incredible people who work at the BFI, and I'm working with them and they're amazing. But I'd say for your first 1 to 3 films, really just try and maybe self-fund on Kickstarter, pull in favors with the queer community, and just make something in the way that you want to make it, so that when you do approach the BFI, you've got a very clear voice. And I think that's really important, to establish how you want to say stuff before anyone tells you. Yeah, I would say definitely do that. And work with as many queer people as possible.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, let's move on to your podcast.
Yeah.
So, for people listening, Amru has a podcast on the BBC Sounds.
That's right.
Also available on Apple Podcasts.
Most podcast apps, to be honest, have it.
Okay, cool. So, it's called Non-Binary.
Yeah, or just called NB, actually.
It's called NB.
Yeah.
My mistake.
No worries.
So, tell us about that.
Yeah, so NB so Caitlin, who's they're my co-host, works at the BBC and is just started their coming out process as someone non-binary, and they decided to explore their journey through a podcast series, and then they approached me and asked me to kind of mentor them, and the series is basically going around and just exploring our own non-binary identities by talking to some of the most incredible people from the trans and non-binary community. I mean, I can't believe the level of the guests that we've had, from Juno Roche to Travis Alabanza, CM Lester, and really we just wanted to make a podcast that had no debate, no polemics. No one's justifying their identity, no one's arguing about it. There's not a single cis person at all. Even our producer was trans, non-binary. So it was it was important that there was no level of, at all debating the identity. We just, especially with the political climate at the moment, where it feels like trans and non-binary people are constantly being asked to justify why they are trans and non-binary, which is
oh god, yeah.
Yeah. And my solidarity to you. I can imagine it must be really hard for trans women at the moment.
It's been better, but more visibility.
Yeah, more visibility, but it's a particularly toxic time. So we just wanted to make something that had nothing to do with debate. We just wanted to be loads of non-binary people talking among themselves about their experiences in an uplifting, happy way. I actually think that it's a very kind of gleeful podcast.
Of course, provide a link in the description of this podcast so you can follow all of Amru's work. Amru, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you so much, Michelle.
So, Anemone as a film is beautiful. The use of colours and lighting in it are astounding. Even to the small things like the location of the house where Anemone, the lead character in it, lives. Is all sort of colourful and bright, but then the most beautiful scenes are in the fish shop, where Anemone sort of discovers a way to communicate their identity through basically fish. And it's such a beautiful little movie. And also, the podcast series NB, give that a sub. That is something that I completely missed, but it's a pretty big deal with the very high production values from the BBC.
Yes, no. So I'm aware of that. So I know I think Sian Lester has been involved. There's artist and musician who is non-binary. So yes, I know of it, and I've heard good things about it. I haven't actually sat down and listened to it.
I've listened to the first 3 episodes. There's 6 available at time of recording. It's an 8-episode limited series. You can get that on, like I said in the interview, BBC Sounds app. You can get it in pretty much all the usual places. So yeah, I would check out everything that Amru is doing, because they are a gosh darn delight and so talented. So, link to their Twitter in the description. Follow their career.
Yeah, it came across really nicely in the interview, and I am interested because I don't think they're the first trans/non-binary person to kind of drawn that connection to sea life, essentially, because slight plug for myself, but I like, when I've screen printed t-shirts, one of the popular ones that I seem to do a lot of is "Under the sea, gender is more fluid," with a little picture of a seahorse. So, because, gender under the sea is a much more, more fluid concept, essentially. So I'm quite cheered up to hear that there's a film that's kind of making extensive use of that kind of imagery and the way it's doing that. So from what you've said about it and the use of colour, because again, I've not seen this film, I haven't even seen any promo stuff for it, that's definitely one I'm going to be checking out. It sounds like you had a splendid time, Michelle.
I really did. The festival itself, or all the staff there were lovely. I felt safe in a way that I usually only have at various trans events and trans pride, because whilst there was only a few trans people walking around, it was very much like there was maybe 100 films showing, and the vast majority are about, queer relationships and queer expression rather than trans issues directly. But non-binary toilet facilities everywhere, everyone got the pronouns right. It was just an absolute pleasure to be there, and I'd like to thank Paul and Vicky, the publicists who hooked me up with all these interviews, and the others that we don't have time to go into, and also Matthew, who was working on the industry desk. He hooked me up with a few people. He was an absolute pleasure to meet, and yeah, it was just such a successful event, and I would recommend in years to come you go and buy some tickets and you go to this thing. It's on the South Bank, the BFI Centre, which is a place that I would not have been able to afford to if I didn't have a press pass. So thank you guys for letting me in the building. It was so great. And I had a great time, and I wish I could have covered it more, but then
there's only one
of me, and I'm not going to lie, by the end of it, the old mental health was starting to suffer a bit. Not because of anything at the festival, just because I didn't want to leave. I did 12 to 13 hour days there, watching films and chatting to people, and was loving it. Felt so good to be covering an event like a journalist again, which I haven't done in years.
You were firing on all cylinders, of course, and so that was kind of great to see, just on a personal level. But you can't make a habit of that sort of thing, and so for that reason, it's worth pointing out here, listeners, that because of the extremely intensive workload for this particular episode and the last couple, our next episode, episode 20 of What the Trans, is actually going to be a week after it normally would be. So we'd normally be expecting it to tomorrow. The episode that we're currently recording, that you are currently listening to, was ostensibly released around about April the 3rd. Our next episode is not going to be around about the 17th. As it initially would have been. We are taking an extra week, so we will speak to you again on April the 24th. So that's a date for your diary. You've got an extra week without What the Trans, but I am sure this lengthy, extremely firing on all cylinders, very quick episode with lots of stuff in it can bring you some warmth in the dark days to come before the next episode. But yes, wanted to get that in there before we finished up. Our next episode, 1 week late, April 24th. Look out for it. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, this is a double episode, so people are eventually going to get more content from us. It's just going to be spaced out in a different way.
Pretty much.
So you're getting more of us. Just, you'll have to be patient. Yeah, so much fun, so worth it. But I'm going to take the week. I'm going to catch up on my video games. I'm going to have a lot of fulfilling naps. I'm going to eat lots of fruits and vegetables, and yeah, it's going to be good.
That sounds splendid. Well, why don't you get on with that immediately?
Regardless of that, we are still contactable in all the places we usually are. You can get us on Twitter at @WhatTheTrans. If you saw any of the films or have anything to say, or want to shout at us because we got something wrong, feel free to tweet away or send us a message. Also, you can get us on our website, which has more details on where you can get us, whatthetranspod.tumblr.com, and you can get us on Facebook /whatthetrans. Ashley, is there anything else you'd like to cover?
On this occasion, there is not. It sounds like you've had a splendid time at BFI Flair, and it's actually quite nice to spend a fair amount of time covering that's something actually positive and kind of hopeful. So, kind of thank you for that as well, and thank you for your efforts in kind of putting all of this together and schmoozing and interviewing and doing all that Londoner stuff. So yeah.
Sort of a final thought from me on this. Go out and make films. I met so many trans and non-binary filmmakers and potential filmmakers at this festival. It is entirely possible that you could start writing a script today, and I'll see you next year at Flair at your screening.
Yeah, that is a really wonderful note to end the show on. Go make a film. We'll see you in the future, if there is one. Good night.
I fucking hope there's a future.
Yeah, bit of an existential crisis if not. But yes, fabulous stuff. We will see you in 3 weeks' time. Get some rest, Michelle, and everybody else. Try and look after yourselves. And yes, speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
Love you, everyone. Bye.